Hello everybody. Today's box opening from Three Old Guys Games is Call of Cthulhu, the 40th Anniversary Edition. This is the exact same cover art and box that was originally produced back in 1981 by Chaosium when they first published this game. The game was unusual for its time because it was such an esoteric topic. The only reason that I picked it up back in 1981 was because my friends and I we're starting to play role-playing games quite a bit, and this one was different. And I was a huge fan of H.P. Lovecraft clear back in high school, and I was the only one who knew anything about him, so I thought, I've got to get this game and introduce this to my friends. So that friends group actually included two of the three old guys. They're here, our team, and a couple of other people that we played with. I'm going to go ahead and open the cellophane on this, and then we'll take a look at the contents of the box. This is quite a blast from the past for those of us who were playing these games back in 1981. And it turned out to be one of the greatest role-playing games of all time. It's still in publication today in its 7th edition. And the players are pretty loyal to it because of the high quality of the adventures that the company produces, Chaosium produces. Try to get this pried open here so we can see the contents. First of all, we have what's in the box, an explanation of the parts. And then we have a number of character sheets for Call of Cthulhu. And remember, this is the classic edition. This is not 7th edition. This is the original game. Actually, it's the 2nd edition because they'd corrected some fairly egregious errors in how you calculated things in the game. Next is the rule book, as it pretty much originally appeared in the 2nd edition. And it goes through how to set up a character, talks about game system and skills, the resistance table, which is a blast from the past for those of us who've been playing it for a while. Firearms tables, melee weapons tables. We'll talk about different skills, diagnose disease, first aid, make maps. Chaosium pronunciation guide to Cthulhuid names. H.P. Lovecraft had a talent for picking out difficult names for people to pronounce. He was significantly overeducated, I guess, but the upshot is that we have an opportunity here to provide guidance on how to pronounce these things, like Ithaquah, or Cthulhu himself. Then there's a discussion of sanity. One of the key elements in H.P. Lovecraft's stories, as well as this game, is sanity. As you see things and experience things, they will slowly drive you insane, which was perfectly in keeping with H.P. Lovecraft's fiction at the time. There's an interesting background on population of cities, foreign cities. Then we talk about the Cthulhu mythos. If you haven't actually read any of the books, this can be very difficult to get across. One of the things that I did with my playing group back in 1981 was I refused to let them read any H.P. Lovecraft because, again, it wasn't a well-known author at the time. Obviously, that's changed enormously nowadays. But at the time, what it did was it made everything a mystery to them. When they met a monster, they had no idea what its capabilities were because they had never read the book or the story that involved that monster. So it goes through the list of the deities and monsters. The deities aren't really like gods in the sense that they would be in a fantasy role-playing game. They're more like extremely advanced, highly technical creatures that are able to manipulate the laws of physics in ways that we cannot understand. In fact, one of the sources of the insanity in these stories and games is the fact that we cannot understand them no matter how hard we try. Then goes through a list of the different kinds of monsters that are available to you to torture your players with and slowly drive them insane so that they're forced to go to an insane asylum someplace and get cured. The game goes on. As we get through the monsters, we then get to magic and spells. One of the key things in Call of Cthulhu itself is the books of the Cthulhu mythos. That's how you learn how to deal with the Cthulhu mythos. It's also a good source of driving you insane because the better the book is at teaching you the things that you need to know about the Cthulhu mythos, the more likely you are to go insane reading it. Makes for an interesting juxtaposition of choices on the part of you as a player. This is a lot of the original art in the game that was originally published back in 1981. Again, the rules book is pretty much the exact same one that was laid out in 2nd edition after they'd corrected some of the errors with the numbers and how the resistance table worked and some other issues that they had. There's you have costs in spells and things like that. Then there's a section on how to play the game. So basically, this was in 1981. This was a somewhat unusual part of any rule set. They basically described to you how you're going to play this game because it was very different from the world's most popular fantasy role-playing game at the time, and some of the other ones that were out as well. They talk about how to set up a scenario, how to run a campaign. They give you a map of Arkham, which is one of the key cities in the Cthulhu mythos, the basis for many of the stories that H.P. Lovecraft wrote. Obviously, it's not a real city. It's a fake city, an imaginary city that existed in Massachusetts. They also provided an example of play. That had been done before, but this one was to show you the differences between how particular dungeon crawl, for example, in some fantasy game worked versus how this was going to work. They also included some ready-to-play scenarios, famous scenarios that are still in print today in various publications. The Haunted House was the first one, and it could lead to quite a bit of future scenarios if you were smart about the way you tied it together. And then there was the second one was the Brockford House, which was actually a different name. It used to be called the Corbin House, but they've renamed it for whatever reason now. And then they have some appendices. They have a beginning scenario for a campaign for you to get involved with. They talk about different libraries and their use. They talk about notes on the fragment of the Necronomicon. There are some excellent articles. This Phileas P. Sadowski made-up guy, whoever actually writes those, he's brilliant. The way he ties things that you wouldn't expect together. It's kind of like very stream of consciousness kind of writing, but it all ties together in ways that make you think. Then they have selected publications that you can read that are written by H.P. Lovecraft and others that talk about the Cthulhu mythos so you can become more familiar with how it works. And finally, there's some designer's notes that were added to this edition because it was, after all, the 40th anniversary edition. And they added a bonus one at the back, Wail of the Witch, wherein the investigators confront a witch out of time and perhaps travel back to the ancient city of the Elder Things, which may not mean anything to you right at this moment, but if you read a little H.P. Lovecraft, it's all very interesting. So that's the rule book, and on the back they have the table of contents. Then they provided a source book for the 1920s. This was, without a doubt, the most outstanding source book I have ever read for any role-playing game. It had everything in there, not in incredible detail, but in enough detail so that you could think about it and you could actually look it up. Of course, back then we didn't have the internet, so it was a little harder, but they did provide enough information for you to get going on. And they provided biographies of key people that you could meet in the 1920s. Remember, this is set in the 1920s. The entire game is at this time. Later on, they would add other eras, but back in 1981, it was 1920s all the way. They had articles on different cultists, different skill sets that you could add to the ones in the basic rule book. They had a previous experience table and a discussion of how previous experience worked so that you could have your character start off as somebody who'd already had a career, say a policeman or an architect or whatever. And then they provide an example of one. And all throughout this, they have maps of various locations that your people might go to during the course of their investigations into the Cthulhu mythos. Their objective in this game is to try and prevent Cthulhu or any of the creatures like him coming back from where they've been imprisoned, and then basically trying to avoid going insane while they're doing that. They have a map of rail lines circa 1920 in the northeast of the United States. And they have an excellent article on transport speeds, the largest steamships, the distances, the times, the costs for everything, prices and cash. And meanwhile, there's another map here, Teotihuacan. And then they've got a list of new weapons that you might run across in the different kinds of countries. And they've even got a map that breaks it up into regions. So region 7, you can look over here and it says zone jungle areas between Mexico and Argentina, and it lists the kind of weapons that would be most commonly in use in that area. There's black market weapons and weapon notes, hand grenades, dynamite sticks. Believe me, your characters will come up with things to try and stop these monsters, because a lot of times shooting it with a .45 caliber bullet doesn't actually do much to the monster. They will kill you. Then they have some basic creatures that are more mundane, I guess, than the typical Call of Cthulhu type creatures: werewolves, vampires, zombies, that kind of thing. And at the end, they include a bibliography so you can look up more information. Back in the day, I acquired copies of the Sears Roebuck catalog for 1923 and also 1928. And those were tremendously helpful when my players wanted some weird thing. I could look it up in the Sears Roebuck catalog, quote them a price, give them availability, and then make sure that they got it. And then I could figure out how it would work. And then there's a sketch map of certain New England territories. One of the things you'll see here, this is what's called Lovecraft country nowadays. This area right around here, Dunwich, Arkham, and Kingsport, and Innsmouth up here. Those were key cities figuring in various aspects of H.P. Lovecraft's stories and several of his most important stories. So it's definitely a useful piece of information to have. And of course, the cover is actually a cutaway of a Zeppelin, because everybody needs a Zeppelin when they're going to explore the Call of Cthulhu mythos, believe me. You need that kind of transport. Next item in the box, this is, again, the classic 40-year anniversary edition, so they provided reprints of some of the very first things that they added to the game. And one of the very first was Shadows of Yog-Sothoth, a global campaign to save mankind. And this one was the very first campaign ever provided for Call of Cthulhu. It came out, I believe, in 1982 or early 83. And I ran my players through it, and it was a very interesting experience for all of them. This would be the time, if memory serves, when one of our friends shot a god and actually hit him across a room with a pistol. He rolled a 0-0, killed the god, and saved the situation that they were in. It was so unbelievably impossible that we still talk about it to this day. It was in this scenario, look to the future, that happened. Anyway, that's a series of different scenarios that hook together to form a campaign, and if you manage to come out alive on the other end, then you've defeated the monsters, at least temporarily. They also included a bonus scenario, People of the Monolith, which is a great introductory scenario if you choose not to use the one in the rule book. It takes them to Hungary for a little bit of exploration around a particular monument. Anyway, excellent campaign. It's a little dated nowadays. There are other better campaigns that have been published, but the fact of the matter is that one was the very first one, and it was a pretty darn good campaign, even by the standards of the day, let me tell you that. Next book is The Asylum and Other Tales. This is one of the source books that they produced for the game. Again, this one was originally published in 1983. It's got some basic scenarios, it's got some advanced scenarios, and it's got some interesting twists on the theme of H.P. Lovecraft's story. The very first scenario is the auction, which was an introductory scenario, and then the others, a couple of them tie together into sort of a mini campaign, but generally speaking, they were designed as one-shots so that you could run your players through something if you hadn't got a campaign together for them yet. One of the scenarios, the Mauritania, is actually a transport scenario that you can plug into some other campaign if you wish. You can use it, for example, if they're going to sail from New England to Europe to do explorations in Europe, you can put them on the Mauritania and run them through that scenario if you like. It's a pretty interesting thing. There's a kind of a B-movie one called The Gate from the Past, where monsters come through a gate, including Tyrannosaurus Rex and things like that. Very much a Valley of Gwangi kind of thing, if that rings any bells for anybody. If not, look it up on YouTube. You'll be amused at the very least. And The Asylum, well, clearly one of the doctors is a little out of control on the back cover here. Next was the Cthulhu Companion, and you'll remember that Professor Sadowski that I mentioned. He's in here with a fascinating article on further notes on the Necronomicon, is what it's called. And it's just brilliant, again, the way he ties things together. There are a number of scenarios. Before we get into the scenarios, though, there's an article on Cthulhu mythos and Mesoamerican religion. Again, basically, it says that all the gods in the Mesoamerican religions were really Cthulhuid monsters, which they do the same for a lot of other backgrounds. And again, well done. Gives you a lot of scenario ideas. Excuse me. They also do source book editions, so they have prisons, a couple of new skills, Lovecraftian timelines, and then rulebook editions. They provided new phobias, 2 new types of insanity, and additional deities, races, and monsters from not only H.P. Lovecraft, but a lot of the supporting authors that wrote after he passed away and added to his mythos, if you will. There's excerpts and prayers, which are pretty amusing. And then there's a number of scenarios: Paper Chase, Mystery of Loch Finn, The Rescue, and The Secret of Castro Negro, which was one of the most popular scenarios at the time that it was published. And again, this was originally published in 1983. It's a complex scenario, but it's brilliant, and the protagonists, both good and bad, can be used over in additional scenarios. So you'll find ties occasionally, Easter eggs, if you will, in future, in publications that came years later. They'll refer back to events that happened in the Secret of Castro Negro scenario. So it's definitely a good thing to run that one past them. So, and again, the original art throughout the book, Cthulhu Mythos and Mesoamerican Religion, just brilliant work, all in all. You'll find a lot here that'll help your game and make it more amusing, more fun. Further notes on the Necronomicon, he introduces different things that are close to, there's a lot of things in history that can actually be tied into this mythos if you want to shift it around just a little bit. So again, brilliant edition and well worth acquiring even today. So, Trail of Tsathoggua was a short campaign set in Norway, if memory serves. It's been a long time. And they also added a couple of, they added an additional scenario called The Haunted House, which is an excellent one. Again, ran people through that. They also added something for rewards for valor, and Shadows Over Hollywood was another scenario. And then they have a little remembrance of one of the people that was involved in the original game when it was published. This scenario pack was actually published in 1984. So again, pretty old game thing, some of the original art. And again, it ties Cthulhu mythos into all kinds of far northern Greenland and etc. type mythologies, and works very well. Next one is another Cthulhu companion, Fragments of Fear. And again, these companions were simply outstanding work for their day. Strongly recommend, if you get a copy of this. It's available, by the way, from Chaosium, and we do have it listed on our website, though availability is iffy sometimes. So this was originally published in 1984, I believe, or 1985? 1985, there you go. It has a number of different things in here. Some of them are just amusing, but there's a table of mythos comparative sizes, which is quite useful. There's on the ubiquity of Cthulhu. There's a couple of scenarios in here, the Underground Menace and Valley of the Four Shrines, which, as I recall, was a pretty darn good scenario. I ran a group through that when I was stationed in Berlin, and they loved it. And there's a bit of a discussion of some of the spells and so on. Again, an excellent addition to your collection for Call of Cthulhu. Well worth acquiring if you can. Next item in the box is a map, a quite large map, about the size of your typical wargame map, 34 by 20, or 33 by 40 something, can't remember. And if I can get it unfolded here without doing damage to it. This is obviously the first time I've opened this box, so everything's pretty tight here. First of all, on this side we have a world map, which in addition to having things like the continents, the rivers, and major cities, also has Cthulhuid areas of interest, locations that appeared either in scenarios, in the books, or by mention. So there's Mound City over here, Nithlay, which is a offshore city of the Deep Ones near Arkham, actually near Innsmouth. There's historical locations like Nineveh and Catalhuyuk, but again, that relates to the maps that are in the 1920 source book. So it all ties together very well, and this is a very useful map in that it gives you some places to go look at, and it also provides time zones, so you can see what's going on. Big difference between this and the original map is on this map, they've printed on the reverse a map of Arkham, the city, which is useful for you when you're basing your group out of Arkham in Lovecraft Country. And believe me, most groups do start out there because that's where a lot of the introductory scenarios are based. So, useful, useful, useful. Remember that size comparison chart I mentioned that was in the other book? Well, they also produced it here to give you an idea of how big some of these creatures are. And they provide human-sized creatures so that you can compare them. So there's a human, excuse me, just about to be eaten by mighty Cthulhu, who is this huge thing over here. There's a Shuggoth, there's another human down there, and so on. You can see the different kinds of creatures. Remember Ithaquah, the Windwalker, he's here, and there's a human there, so you get a comparison of size. And this gray thing all the way across here is a large dole, which is a sort of a worm that burrows through the earth, and it has a little note on the side of the thing over here. Large dole extends 18.5 inches further beyond this chart. So clearly those things are quite enormous compared to a human. Again, a useful chart for your gaming people to experience. We have here I believe it's a Game Master screen, if I can get it open without doing damage here. Yep, sure is. Background, of course, is images for the players to observe, and then on this side there's all the charts you basically need to run pretty much everything, along with the books of the mythos, typical sanity losses when you're in the middle of something, description of the Cthulhu mythos, skill. This is how you learn about the Cthulhu mythos and everything, and sanity results, institutional disasters that can happen when you're in an insane asylum, monster tables, spell list, melee weapons, damage bonuses, and ranged weapons. Believe me, those will be important. While in H.P. Lovecraft's actual fiction, there wasn't a lot of gunplay. Players in this game, there's a lot of gunplay. There's a lot of dynamite. There's a lot of flamethrowers, and things like that if they can get a hold of them. So the upshot is you have to be prepared for some strange things to go on. Very much a pulpish version of H.P. Lovecraft. These were something that they provided in the original game, character figures that you could put on stands. Originally, you were supposed to fold them and then use like a penny as the base, but we have different creatures, people, adventurers, and a sacrificial altar, and so on. And here's some more. These were not in the original, by the way. These are extras that were added to this particular package. Next, we have the handouts for the original Shadows of Yog-Sothoth campaign. These were provided as part of the classic thing, so that you could hand them out without having to make copies out of your book, which is how we used to have to do it. And there is, I should tell you, there is a product produced by the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society that has world-class versions of these handouts. These are perfectly adequate. They'll do everything that you need them to do for your scenarios and games. But the ones produced by the HPLS Historical Society, which Chaosium fully supported them doing this, are just absolutely outstanding quality. I mean, they're like things that look like they're a real newspaper or a real diary entry, and well worth acquiring if you have the opportunity. I honestly didn't check the HPLS site before making this video, so I'm not sure if it's still on sale, but they did have it about 6 months ago. And then last but not least, they sent a copy of the various dice. You'll see there's 3 6-sided dice, which is important for the way the resistance table and everything works, and then the usual polyhedral dice. And that pretty much concludes our box opening for the day. If you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to hear them. If you have anything else that you would like to hear from us on the game, we can certainly provide information to you. Feel free to contact us through our website. And please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to see more box openings like this. And I appreciate your time and attention. Have a great day.